Hi everyone, this lecture is on the problems with the natural law theory. So before going to the problems, we kind of want to recap some of the attractions to the theory, right? So it encompasses several natural values: life, health, procreation, while others have only one. For example, utilitarian, remember, has hedonism or pleasure as its only value. But natural law theory has several values, which seemed more true to life, right, and true to our experience. Now, motivation for fulfilling moral responsibilities, right, because it's due to our nature and our function, so there's motivation to fulfill our natural function. And also combines deontology and consequentialism. So depending on how you take it, there are consequentialist benefits, and there are, deontological benefits, as we saw in the kind of doctrine of double effect video. So some of the problems. Now, one problem is that the first principle, and by first principle meaning what's the kind of primary foundational principle that natural law theorists hold on to. That is, why think there is a moral obligation to promote natural values? That is, why think that because we function a certain way, right? Let's say we have the natural value of procreation, and then why think that therefore that's how we should morally act, right? Why do we need it? Is it then wrong to procreate? Or even if we go into a different kind of example, right? What if I do have the natural inclination, and our natural function is to procreate and have sex? And if that's the case, then can I just have sex with anyone, right? There are certain limits to that. So certain perverse people may think, well, I can. It's just natural. I'm just a guy, right? And then therefore that's their excuse for justifying sexual assault, right? That's obviously wrong, right? Just because something is natural doesn't mean that it's justifiable, right? So that's one thing about the first principle. You would, if you want to continue on, you would have to modify what you mean by that, right? The other thing is the is-ought distinction. Is it a fallacy? Now, what is the is-ought distinction? The is-ought distinction is, just because something is the case doesn't mean that it ought to be the case. And that's kind of similar to what I mentioned earlier. Just because it is the case that I have these natural values and natural functions, and it promotes certain kinds of direction in the way that I lean towards, right? Does that necessarily mean, therefore, that that's what I ought to do, right? Isn't it perfectly acceptable not to do it, right? Even if I have the natural inclination to do something, right? So isn't it okay for someone to be completely celibate, even if they have the natural inclination and value, excuse me, of procreation? Sorry. Now, some people have called that the naturalistic fallacy or the is-ought fallacy. But now Aquinas, remember, he puts the natural order reflects God's good purposes. So my kind of examples of sexual assault and those kinds of things, he could kind of take those away because it reflects God's purposes, and his purposes, presumably would not include assault, sexual assault. Now, the natural order aims at some good, aims at good, and we should promote those natural goods. Now, one kind of issue with that is that most religions, view the present world as corrupted. So when you look at Genesis 3, that's the fall of human beings, right? Where Adam and Eve take of the forbidden fruit, and that kind of creates disorder, and they're kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and so forth, so on and so forth. Well, whether that actually happened or not is kind of irrelevant. What is relevant is that the Christian conception is that there is corruption in the world. So nature is corrupted in some sense. Now, I'm kind of going to go a little bit of a sidetrack because I think it's helpful to understand that even among Christians, for example, the Catholics and Protestants, they're going to view human nature a little bit differently. So, for example, Protestants, especially certain types of Protestants, kind of have emphasized the nature of the corruptions a lot. So human beings are utterly sinful, and their nature has been corrupted. So we need the forgiveness of God and all, Jesus' death and resurrection, all that kind of restores that. Whereas the Catholic conception, although it has that as well, but it adopts a more kind of positive view of human nature, in the sense that think of like a mirror that has some marks on it, right? Does it reflect you? Yes. Perfectly? No. But it still reflects a good deal of you, right? So in the sense that if human beings are made in the image of God, it reflects imperfectly, but it does reflect a lot. So there's some differences there. But getting back to the objection, or at least one possible worry or problem, is that if there is corruption, whether it be very extreme on the Protestant end or not as extreme as the Protestant on the Catholic end, not all natural processes and values are purely good, right? So there is a worry there. Now, is there a way for him to patch up the theory? Sure. He was a smart dude. Okay. Another thing is that you need to distinguish the goods as God's intended from what has been corrupted. And that's the move they have to make. Certain things have been corrupted, some things have not. Okay. The other kind of problem with the natural law theory is vagueness, right? Well, and what do we mean by vagueness? Vagueness is usually said of a term, right? A particular concept when it's not clear. So the word natural, what does that mean, right? What does it mean for something to be natural? So think of like pure nature. Yeah, pure nature is natural. Like if we did, when no human beings existed in the world, and there were just plants and animals and dinosaurs and stuff like that, it was completely natural, right? But when we start putting in human technologies, at what point does it cease to be unnatural? So is it natural for humans to build things? Yes, we're intelligent, we can build things, we can improve our conditions, right? Is making like a log cabin from our hands and an axe, right? Is that natural? Or do we just have to live in caves, right? So improving our conditions in, obviously if at some point technology becomes unnatural, right? When we're starting to split atoms in such a way, right, that it creates a kind of destruction that the world would not have on its own, or something like that, right? That becomes unnatural. But there must be some, it seems unclear, right? Another example, procreation is natural and good, right? But what about using artificial insemination or IVF, right? In vitro fertilization, or, on the other end, birth control. Now, isn't that like unnatural, but you're breathing life, right? So the reply that natural law theorists will give is that the natural relates to processes' ends, not origins. So the origins is not as important as the purpose of that process. What is the purpose of, for example, IVF, right? It's to have a child or children. And in that case, they may be okay with that, right? what's the purpose of human beings to build certain things, right? If it's to house one's family, or that might be okay, but the purpose is maybe unnatural if it's to create a nuclear bomb or something like that. Okay. So the origin of technology is not as important as the end or purpose. Yeah, but still, it's difficult to quite nail down what natural means. So the natural law theorists, if someone is one, or the ones that are, have to do a lot of kind of categorizing there. The other problem is the problem from the Doctrine of Double Effect that I covered in a previous video. But just to kind of review the problem of moral confirmation and the problem of the same act having kind of, just because the way you describe it is different, seems to make it either right or wrong, or it makes it difficult to determine right or wrong. That is the practicality, right? I mean, just because the intention of something goes one way, because my mind thinks that I am trying to save people, but in saving people I am killing innocent people. I mean, just a switch in one's intention that makes it right rather than wrong. So go back to the Doctrine of Double Effect video for in-depth ideas of that. I just wanted to include it just to be more complete. And the kind of final problem is the general problem of natural law theory is the nature of evolutionary theory seems to deny natural values and functions. So yes, there are biological natural kind of functions that something has, right? Like a protein goes this way, a cell functions this way, and that kind of stuff. But does the whole organism as a human being, right, do we have a natural function aside from biological functions, right? And that seems to maybe not be true. And that's at least very controversial, right? So that's why Aquinas needs, God, in the sense that if you have God's purposes for human beings, or that human beings have some sort of image of God or something of that sort, a spark of God or whatever, then he can say that there is a function for the human being as a whole, right? That is to live according to God's ways or purposes, or to develop virtues, that blah, 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 right? But if you're not going to go with a theistic account of natural law, then you have to kind of make sense of what natural goods are without natural functions. How can we have a natural good without it functioning a natural way? So I hope this helps clarify. It's a hard chapter, but hope it helps you out, and I'll see you online.